Hello, class. Today we are going to look at the levels of motor control in the somatic nervous system. So, this gives a simplified analogy and diagram of how sensory information is taken in and act upon on our skeletal muscle. So, there's a couple things to remember here is that the oops the yellow marker indicates the main steps that happens, and the blue marker indicates what is happening at the same time. So what happens? So first of all, we have the premotor cortex, the association area, processing that sensory input. So let's say the sensory input was sent to the sensory cortex, to the basal nuclei, to the premotor, or it is sent from the sensory input to the cerebellum to the premotor. So that sensory input is sent to the premotor cortex. After that, sensory information will then be synapsed onto our primary motor cortex. So that you could think of this as your brain, for example. So this is your premotor cortex. After that, it will then synapse into the primary motor cortex. Okay? After that, you will then have the so from here, from the primary motor cortex all the way to the upper part of the spinal cord is the upper motor neuron. Here we have sensory information going from the primary motor cortex, bypassing the brainstem, and then to the spinal cord. So sensory information will then be synapsed from the primary motor cortex, bypassing our brain stem and heading towards the spinal cord by a specific tract, the corticospinal tract. So sensory information will pass onto the spinal cord via this pathway. And then we have sensory information going from the brainstem onto the spinal cord via the indirect tracts. So let me just put something here. Reflexes. So when reflexes are then sent, as you can see, they are also then sent into the spinal cord. So you could think of, let's say you tap your patellar ligament, and then you have the knee-jerk reflex that will obviously go and be processed on the spinal cord portion of our central nervous system. So after the information is then sent onto the spinal cord, it will then be directed onto the lower motor neuron. So from here, from a certain portion of the spinal cord all the way to the certain portion of the skeletal muscle, it is all part of the lower motor neuron. So information will go from the lower motor neuron and then eventually act on the skeletal muscle. So the main thing to remember here, to not make it, to kind of simplify this, is that we have sensory information sending synapses to different parts of either the brain or to our spinal cord, okay? And it will travel from one part to another until it reaches the premotor, okay, or the brainstem, or the spinal cord, okay? These three areas, so the premotor, the brainstem, the spinal cord, are where these sensory input via reflex or via another component will travel to. So these are its main destinations, which will influence what will happen on the motor control of our skeletal muscle. So I hope that gives some sort of a good introduction to what is the levels of motor control that is involved in the somatic nervous system.